a newspaper writer who finds out about this, thinks it's interesting, and writes a newspaper article about Tepper. Other New Yorkers read it, and then they start to wonder, what is it that he knows that we don't? So they start looking for him. And wherever Tepper parks, people will be lined up outside his car for the opportunity to come and sit with him. And they'll knock on his window and say, can we come in there and sit with you? And he always says, why not? And so they'll come in and they'll sit in his car with him and proceed to tell him all of their problems. And Tepper never says anything more profound than, yeah, man, there's always something. And they go away feeling like they've been incredibly helped. You know, he becomes this kind of guru. Well, you get it, right? You know, for those few moments they're in his car, he's with them. He's fully with them. It's what we call the ministry of presence. It's the most important kind of ministry that we have, just kind of being with people. We just got through a couple of weeks ago with our senior blessing. We take our ministry Bible majors, seniors, out for an afternoon and an evening to bless them and help them make the transition from being our students to being our colleagues in ministry, which is a really difficult transition for a student. And a lot of things get said out there. And when students talk about what has been most meaningful in their experience at ACU, it's almost never something that happened in class. It happened in a hallway. It happened in an office. In one of those fleeting moments that make so much difference in people's lives if you're just paying attention. Okay, but there's two parts to this. We're Christians, right? So it's not just a matter of being fully present to the person in front of you. It's about being fully present to God. How many? Let's try this out. How many of you have read the book, The Prayer of Jabez? I'm always curious about this. Okay, there's always quite a few. Yeah, I don't care for it. I wish I had written it. It's only sold like 80 billion copies. Well, I mean, he's misread the text that he's basing the book on, and the examples are too triumphalistic, but those who've read the book know there's a thought in the book that is absolutely life-transforming. And that is, what would life be like if I went through it asking God to give me some ministry? Now, that's a life-transforming idea. I like my own question better. It's the same question, but the way I ask it is, how can this moment be a kingdom moment? Now, I don't like to do this all the time, but every once in a while I get the urge. I often get it in airports, because I'm in airports all the time, and that's one of the places where people go to lose their religion. And most of the time when I'm in an airport, I don't want to be bothered by people, and I have developed several strategies to make sure that doesn't happen. I will almost never read my Bible in an airport, which is just like attracting every kook in the airport that comes down and visit with you. And if I am going to read the Bible, I'll generally put it in the middle of a big philosophy book and no one will talk to me. It's kind of like this radiation zone, don't get in there. Well, there have been a few exceptions. I was flying to a place once to speak on something I'd never spoken on before, and I was way behind, and so I didn't have my Bible out, and I was working like mad. And living in West Texas, we get some fierce flying weather, and this was one of those days where the weather was so rough that the flight attendants never got out of their chairs. It was really difficult. And the poor woman sitting beside me had never flown before. And 20 minutes into the flight, she is just petrified and green. And she creates what I would call an airplane faux pas. She grabs me. Now, if you don't fly, let me give you a word of etiquette. There is no grabbing the person sitting beside you unless you got on the plane with them. But I've never seen this woman before, and she grabs me. And I look over at her, and she says, panic-stricken. She says, how can you work on that? Great moment. I said, well, ma'am, if this plane crashes, I'm fine. But if it lands, I have got to have this done. So we had this great discussion about life and death and God and aerodynamics. It's just kind of a wide-ranging discussion. I don't do that very often. But every once in a while in an airport, I'll be there and I'll say, okay, God, I'm only going to be here for 10 minutes. I hope. I'm never going to see these people again. You and me, God, in the next 10 minutes, let's do something. Now, if you're going to do this, you do have to get away from your Church of Christ bias that the only thing that counts is closing the deal. Okay, because in this situation, you're not going to close the deal. That's right. You're just going to kind of try to put a brick in the wall. And you can believe it or not, But every time I pray that prayer, something happens. Now, my students and I have a disagreement about what happens. They think what happens is when I pray that prayer, God goes up behind the sinner and kind of shoves him. And I catch him, so to speak. But I don't think that's what happens. I think what happens is when I pray that prayer, the scales fall from my eyes. Amen. And I see what's around me, because in a world as desperate and broken and wounded as ours, every moment is filled with kingdom possibilities. Amen. Most of the time, I'm just not looking. Amen. I'm not paying attention. Our students just a few weeks ago got off of spring break campaigns. I joined one group up in Canada on the back end of the weekend, and they were doing some work. And these spring break campaigns really are work for the young, let me assure you. I mean, they go all over the place. They drive like mad and work like mad, and old people just can't do it. We have the New York campaign, the Boston campaign, the Los Angeles campaign, the Hawaii campaign. That one feels very quickly. And then there's this group that I have worked with in the past. We no longer have this campaign. You'll see why in a moment, called Seek and Follow. Do you see the difference? There's the New York campaign, the Boston campaign, the LA campaign, and Seek and Follow. Seek and Follow is made up of those kids who do not think you have to have a strategic plan in order to serve God. In fact, they don't think you have to have a plan at all. And so they don't. They seek. They don't know where they're going to go. They just take off. And it gets a little flaky sometimes. They'll get to a crossroads, can't figure out what to do. They'll get out the map. They'll pray over it. One of the students says, I think we should go this way, and off they'll go. Our administration has never liked this campaign. You can imagine our dilemma. Their parents call up in the middle of the week and say, where are our children? And all we can say is, only God knows. We are not in the loop. So I work with this group, they'll come back and they'll want to report to me. They say, you're not going to believe what happened. We got to this place, and we had just enough people, and they needed this done, and we did it, and we went to the next place, and the same thing happened again, and we just know God was leading us all the way. I said, I agree with that. I really do. I just don't think God was leading you the way you think He was. Now, He may have been, because it's one of the rules of my life not to tell God what to do because it annoys Him. And if God wants to speak to a student at every crossroads, that's His business. But I said, I think what happened is you went out of here with your spiritual antenna high and prayer in your heart, and all you were saying was, God, we want to serve you wherever and however we can, and you could have driven any direction, any number of miles, and anywhere you wound up would have been someplace you were desperately needed. And if I'm right, the rest of your life could be a spring break campaign. That's right. And some of those kids kind of took that challenge, and those needs they found out on the road, they also found across the street from our campus. Okay. Well, you get the idea. Most of you, like me, at one point in your life have been in a meeting that was a disaster because you had such a strong notion about what had to happen in that meeting that if God had ever had an idea, it never had a prayer, so to speak. So what I want to do is I want to keep asking myself, how does this become a kingdom moment? Okay, that's number 2. Today I'll be fully present to the people in front of me and to God. I'm going to do the last 2 really quickly. Number 3, today I will be the Christ. All I'm doing is echoing Paul here. For me to live is Christ. And we all have different kinds of talents and skills. We all have different ways of loving God, like we talked about at the beginning. But the plain fact of the matter is, the basic ministry we all have is exactly the same, and that is to show what Jesus would look like if He were in my particular situation. So my task is to show my students what Jesus would look like if He were an eccentric, bearded, single professor teaching theology at Abilene Christian University. I tell my freshmen, your job is to show me what Jesus the teenager would look like. Big job. Important job, because I have great curiosity about that. Don't you? I mean, I have always been a little resentful of the 4 Gospels for not giving me a little insight on Jesus the teenager. Surely all youth ministers and parents wonder about it. What must it have been like to have raised a child who not only thought they were God, but was? What must that have been like? Can you imagine? Whenever I have a conflict with a student, and they show up in my office, I know this is going to sound strange, but the first question I always ask them is, are you a Christian? And it's not because I'm nosy or I'm going to try to beat them up with the Bible if they're not. It's that if they're a Christian, we're going to have a completely different kind of conversation than we are if they're not. Because if they're a Christian, what I'm going to say to them is, what I need you to do is help me to think through what Jesus would look like if He were sitting where I'm sitting. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to help you understand what Jesus would be saying and doing if He were sitting where you're sitting right now. And that's a completely different kind of conversation. Some really tense conversations take a completely different tact when you start trying to help each other.